If I can turn people on to really underrated rock albums like this one, then I've done my job. Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and on this fine summer day, we've got a review of somehow only the fourth full-length album from these Japanese math rock legends, Toe. It's Now I See the Light. And I get it, math rock can be a scary phrase for some people, noodling for noodling's sake. Endless complexity without much heart or melodic payoff. And I do understand that mindset, that critique, because when you put such a premium on technicality, it certainly can go too far and come off a little bit cold. But despite this band's chops as players, these circling fly guitar and bass lines that kind of make you swat at your headphones, or Kashikura's blistering, skittering drum workouts. Despite all that, Toe have always managed to be exceptionally accessible and listenable. Take 2005's debut album, the book about my idle plot on a vague anxiety. Like this amazing blue cover art suggests, the overall emotional effect of this album is very tranquil and meditative, incorporating the twinkling clean tones and repetitive cycles of post-rock. Somehow this band could both work you into a frenzy and pacify all your anger and aggression at the same time. 2009's follow-up, For Long Tomorrow, continued this formula with short songs, jagged riffs, odd rhythmic emphases, but adding some pretty subtle but welcome additional elements like these wordless textural vocals and even more acoustic guitar and some auxiliary electronic pieces like chimes thrown in, marimbas, stuff like that. All these fun additions really work for me. I mean, they made some less than phenomenal chord progressions really shine, with extra dynamic range and textural depth. A song like After Image, just absolutely killer sound, so unique. These two first albums were super influential in what you might call the second or third wave of the genre, depending on where you start. For like the beginnings of math rock, you could go way back to Trout Mask Replica or Frank Zappa for kind of the roots, or you could look at the 80s like bands like Rush and King Crimson's Discipline album. Then there's the 90s with Slint and Don Caballero, and later on, you got American Football and TTNG, Terra Melos, bands like that. You can slice it up in a million different ways. There are hundreds of bands to include in the history of this loose genre. But any way you slice it, Toe were doing something very unique and particular at a certain time and place. They were innovators. There were some scattered EPs in the midst of these first two albums, but it took them 6 years to release their third album, and my favorite Toe album, 2015's Hear You. Outside of the buzz of those early innovative years, you had the band's wider set of influences come in spades on Hear You. You had hip-hop and minimalism and some more electronics, some classical piano. Most fan opinion on this album was pretty low around the time it came out, but I think it's an absolute triumph, and I just love the variety across the track list. Instead of this pretty cohesive album experience with all the tracks running together into a unifying sound, this was all over the place and across the map, and I just love every style, every new idea the band brought to the table on this one. I love every song, and it's just so singular, it's so idiosyncratic in its blend of sounds. There's really nothing like it, and that's why I say it's so underrated. But, oh man, instead of bringing a fresh spark of energy to the band to get back on the horse, to get back in the studio, they took another long hiatus after 2015. I was so bummed. And now I barely heard anything about this album in advance. Like last week, heard the single, and then there it is, it's out. I would say Now I See the Light finds some middle ground between the sample platter approach on Hear You and the more focused, seamless experience on Idle Plot. But for me, it isn't as vigorous and technical as Idle Plot, And it's also not as well composed as Hear You. My first impression, at least, was that it did a more meager version of both of those approaches, but did that hold up after now it's been a handful of listens? Well, the album starts on a real high on track 1 with that intro with those bizarre twin guitars, those syncopated rim shots. Then you get the signature toe 4-chord progression with some post-rocky arpeggiation, the smothering bass drum sound. The single, Loneliness Will Shine, comes in with another very classic toe sound, but this time with the vocals playing a leading role. It's in line with the same kind of song-based approach of Hear You. You know, you got distinguishable verses and choruses and an actual vocal hook, if you could even call it that. You know, I don't think vocals have been a real emphasis or strong suit for the band ever. I like that there are vocally focused songs and these vocal sample based songs, but they're not nearly as unique, catchy, or interesting to me as some of the ones on Hear You, like Commit Ballad or Song Silly. Songs like Todo Inada or the 7th track, which translates to Chiaroscuro, center around, instead of, you know, like a vocal line or vocal hook, they're centered around a little guitar flourish, little riff, giving space for each member to shine and have a little moment, like that song Chiaroscuro, which has an extended drum solo in the middle. He is just an insane drummer, really the centerpiece of their sound in many ways, just making all this crazy polyrhythmic stuff sound so in the flow, in the pocket. Toe delivers some of their most pleasant soft rock material as well on this album, like the song Who Knows with its kind of Midwest emo style guitar layers, or the interlude Madness Summer going into that last track, the title track, that introduces strings to their sound and some very soft acoustic fingerpicking and some atmospheric backwards guitars. It's all quite twinkly and sweet, but again, the songs just don't feel strong enough, so it ends up just feeling a little bit limp and lifeless. In the span of like almost 10 years since the last album, I just expect there to be better melodies, better chord progressions floating around in these guys' heads, especially just as seasoned musicians. These don't feel like the cream of the crop ideas. They really don't feel like compositions that the band developed over the course of that time. They often feel like spontaneous jam sessions, you know, which is a style in its own right. I respect that, but a lot of these chord sequences, progressions, like I mentioned, just feel a little bit predictable, tedious, and just don't catch me in the same way as their early records. Even though sonically, texturally, they're made up of a lot of the same ingredients. So those are my feelings on this album. I know I wish I was a little bit more inspired. There is some amazing playing on this album, some incredible chemistry that they built up over the years, and just some really intricate technical things going on. So for that reason alone, it's worth the listen. But just the songwriting doesn't quite do it for me, so I'd give it a 6 out of 10. People are moving away from scores, but I'm sticking to them. I am sticking to those scores. I do hope you check out Hear You by Toe if you haven't already, and their earlier albums as well, which are just all-time classics in this world of math rock, post-rock, indie, alternative, anything. If you haven't already, please like the video, comment below with what you think of Toe, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and as always, thank you so much for watching.